Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Dr. Curtis Webb, and I use the pronouns he, him, and I'm from Design Impact, and I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote conversation today. Today, you'll be hearing from Carlton Turner and Matthew Glassman in a conversation entitled Ending the Deferment of Audacious Dreams. I'm really excited to hear from Carlton Turner today, who is an artist, agriculturalist, researcher, and co-founder of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, which is an organization who uses food and story to support rural community, cultural, social, and economic development in Utica, Mississippi. He'll be joined in conversation today with Matthew Glassman, who is an actor, a writer, lecturer, and director whose work makes connections between nature, the environment, and other sectors such as social movements, culture, and politics. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the metaphorical mic to these incredible guests we have with us today and look forward to the ways they inspire us and call us to action. Thank you, Carlton.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis, for that introduction. I want to also thank Jen and Lynn and Matthew for this opportunity to be engaged in this conversation. Very honored to follow Autumn White Eyes in this conversation. I consider Autumn a friend and collaborator with the work at First People's Fund. And so we can go ahead and get started. I'll also say that I'm calling in from Utica, Mississippi, which is the ancestral land and current land of the Choctaw, also the land of the Quapaw, the Yazoo, and the Natchez people. And Matthew, you're going to be here for a moment. Are you coming back? Should I just go ahead and they've got you spotlighted too? So just wanted to.
Yeah.
There you go. You're gone now. All right. Jasmine, we can start the slides. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes. Slide. Utica is a small town which sits at the foot of the Delta, 30 minutes from the Mississippi. Mississippi, an Ojibwe word that means great river. This river ferried King Cotton and unnamed precious human cargo from weigh-ins and auction blocks into markets and plantation bondage up and down this country, providing a literal stream of income that would build white generational wealth across the nation and fuel the South Block of Confederate political power up through Reconstruction and deep into the era of Jim Crow. During the cotton boom, my community of Utica was perfectly situated in a small yet important location between the growers and the river, a depot of sorts, where growers could bring their harvest to any of the 3 cotton gins to be weighed in and paid out. According to stories, in its day, Utica had a top-of-the-line social scene that included juke joints, cafes, a hotel, a railroad depot, and even an opera house. Utica was the site of the first radio station and the first paved road in the state of Mississippi. Utica was a town built on production. It produced agricultural goods, lumber, and even educators. Slide. But industries inevitably change. And when they do, decisions about the future of communities like mine are usually made for us, rarely by us. These decisions are usually based on an analysis of the potential to exploit labor, land, and the means of production, a capitalist dream. The result is that our communities are adversely impacted by decisions they have very little agency in. Slide. Utica is my home. It's where my children go to school, where my nephews, nieces, and little cousins are growing up. 8 generations of my family are buried beneath this fertile soil. And it's a community vastly different from what it was just a generation ago. Deterioration, like progressive transformation, happens gradually over time. The Utica of my youth was a very different place, and a Utica equipped to exist in the future will also need to be radically different if our community is to thrive. These types of shifts don't happen all at once, they occur over generations. See, change requires intention, time, and radical imagination. Slide. For us, food is the common denominator. It's the thing that everybody does. I grew up in a community where I had a deep and personal relationship with my food. Many people in my community share that experience. Slide. So we use stories connected to food as a framework for accessibility for people to enter to and contribute their story to an ongoing conversation about change. They may not feel comfortable if the frame is just arts, but when you combine food and story, you get a backstage pass to the most prolific of venues for storytelling. The dinner table is the place where I've heard the greatest yarn spinners of my age. Coming from a big family, collard greens, cornbread, fried chicken, and macaroni and cheese become the centerpiece of a visceral and ethereal experience adorned by stories that bring layered emotions, tears, and some of the most gut-wrenching belly laughs you'll ever experience. This place where arts and culture bloom and at the same time fade into the performance or ritual of everyday life is special. It's not just table talk. It's theatrical and emotional. It's personal. It's comedy and drama. It's tragic, but always educational. My work as an artist is to acknowledge those stories and the legacy and future of our community that is encoded within them. Slide. Our ability to achieve health and wellness in our community is directly tied to our agency with the land. It is deeply connected to our ability to construct an analysis of the trajectory our community has taken to be in this current moment. It is grounded in our ability to tell our stories about food and our individual and collective histories to this land. And we believe that through the telling of these stories, we can supplement parts of the social fabric that has been lost the past couple of generations and begin to construct a new community. One that centers the voice of the people that live here in fostering a place that provides health and wellness for all, a community dream. Slide. The central mission of the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, otherwise known as Sipp Culture, is to work to reimagine the measurements by which economic prosperity are calculated, and in the process, redefine wealth for our rural community. We're taking an intergenerational approach to community, cultural, and economic development through the lens of cultural and agricultural production, shifting the community's dominant identity from consumer to producer, creating both a physical and an imagined space for the community to bring its dreams. Our work is comprehensive community cultural transformation. That is, the social and economic transformation of our community using arts and agriculture as an intersecting point to engage the community in a conversation about past, present, and future. The building of a collective dream. Slide. Sipp culture emerged from a need to shift our community from consumers first to being producers first. At the heart of our work is cultural production. It shows up in the production of stories, in media and film, photography, and audio. It shows up in the production of agriculture and growing food and just creating an overall sense of growing as an emerging and dominant community identity. In this process, Utica becomes the backdrop for renewed community energy embodied in the sense that anywhere you have land or space, we can grow something. The work began the moment we offered this idea as a seed to our community to nurture and grow. And in that moment, when we asked permission to share our dreams with the community and have those dreams embraced, the community began to share and layer their dreams upon ours. Together, our dreams and aspirations became interlaced in that process. And that process is the work. That is the community transformation. Difficult to see the incremental change, but remember, transformation takes time. Our community is grounded, slide, in the aesthetics of Black Southern rural culture bearers. Their imprint can be found on every community throughout the South in the forms of architecture, songs, spiritual practices, the movement of bodies, and in the language of freedom. The aesthetic of Sipp culture is birthed in call and response. Tell us what you need, and we'll work to figure out how to manifest it through whatever means accessible. The physical spaces that Sipp culture curates become a physical space to assist in the manifestation of dreams. Slide. We understand the integral connection between the artist's voice and community health and wellness of our rural space. We know the stories told who gets to tell them, and where they are found are all central to the shaping of policy, and they ultimately inform the quality of life in our community and those like ours. Our personal, organizational, and community health and wellness are negatively impacted when the only stories representative of our experiences are bound within someone else's dreams and their limited imagination. To that end, Sipp culture works to develop the imagination and enhance the creativity of our community, both near and far, through critical dialogue driven by arts and cultural exchange to shape and reshape public policy and our nation's collective imagination. Slide. Whether we're supporting rural artists with residency time and funding through the Rural Performance Production Lab, or providing direct funding to artists through our Artist Relief Fund, we're supporting artists in shifting the narrative about what it means to be both Southern and rural. Slide. Whether it's training young farmers in sustainable and regenerative agriculture through our Small Farm Apprentice Program, slide, or providing fresh produce to community elders through our Eldershare Program. Our demonstration of growing food with our community is modeling the role of dreamers as integral to manifesting the version of the world we all deserve to thrive in. Slide. These are our spaces. We operate an artist residency space on 1.5 acres of land. We have a 17-acre community space, which we have our community farm, Sipp Culture Community Farm on, and we have a 4,000 square foot space on Main Street that we're turning into a commercial kitchen and cultural center on Main Street, a building that has not been a viable business for the last 20 years. These physical spaces are the places that we nurture and manifest and open the space for our community to dream together. Now I'd like to invite Matthew Glassman, you can end the slideshow, to help facilitate this next part.
Thanks, Carlton. So much, this is an obscene short amount of time for talk about and get into the project of Sipp culture. This is the work. I've spent a lot of time looking at your work. I've known you for many years. I've talked to you at some length at times. It's so important to remember the backdrop in which we are talking, the sort of the side of the highway that white modernity and white supremacy has left us on, to paraphrase Bayo Kamalafe, a Nigerian poet and philosopher. And I just am trying to acknowledge the space for something that truly is probably beyond naming, that is embodied in Sipp culture. So it's a real privilege to talk to you in the short time we have. And there's so much also programmatic that there wasn't time to share. So I just want to say, I want to invite everybody that's here to give yourself some time to go through the Sipp culture website, because it's the type of story and the type of news that is necessary to confront or to exist in the moment we live in. I want to ask you a little bit about, this is about technical assistance. So I want to talk about the technology of relationships. As you once said to me not so long ago, this isn't project-based work with Sipp culture. This is a lifetime of relationships, and it's generational, and it's slow. I believe that the relationships that we're engaging in with our communities are foundational, and we're in a context of foundations, which have the name of to think that our houses are built on foundations. They give us some money, they give us technical support, but it's these relationships which are foundational. And you're talking about dreaming, which is very personal and very vulnerable. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the relationships that you've built in the actualizing of your dream and ongoing actualization of Sipp culture, and how you build them, and a bit about that technology.
Yeah, so I'd like to thank you. First of all, Matthew, this is really wonderful. So there's relationships that I built, and I think I also want to acknowledge the relationships that I inherited. Doing work in a community in which my family has been for 8 generations, there's a deep sense of inheritance that exists there. So I'll start with the ones that I built. I think, um, my work prior to returning to my home to work was deeply embedded in a Southern cultural practice that extends from the work of the Highlander Center in Newmarket, Tennessee, and into the generation and development of the organization Alternate Roots, which was founded there in 1976, an organization that I came to know in 2001 and spent the next 17 years of my, the bulk of my adult career learning from, being inspired by, and being encouraged and loved into a position of leadership within that organization. And that organization really taught me and modeled for me what it means to have relationships, and what relationships truly mean in the sense of developing over time. That relationships, that there's transformational relationships, which I feel like are the relationships that are really important to the type of work that we're talking about, that we're doing. And there's transactional relationships. Often the relationships that we're in with foundations are transactional. I give you this, you give me these reports, and you do this body of work that helps to continue to validate the existence of our charitable purposes. We validate the existence of your organization. There's kind of an exchange, of transaction that happens there, but the money can be transformational in terms of what it allows you to do, but the relationships are rarely transformational. There are exceptions, but I think the relationship development practice is what I learned and was really developed in Roots. And it's because it's an organization that has been around for 45 years now, and the people who helped to found the organization are still there, still active. And every year there are layers upon layers of new people that come. There are a lot of people that go by the wayside, the people who come to never return, but there's a depth of relationship that existed for 45 years. And I see myself as part of that, like, mid journey. I came into the organization when it was about 25, 26 years old, and have been a part of those relationships for the last couple of decades. That's really important, because when I came home, those relationships came with me, and I say came home, what I mean is when I returned my work home, because I never left home. I always lived here in Mississippi. Even when I worked for Alternate Roots, I never left my home community. But those relationships that I inherited are really important. And I'll tell a really quick story. When I first came back to do this work in Utica, I got a meeting with the mayor, who I did not have a relationship with. And I got my little bios and CV and little writings and stuff that I've done to kind of, take my little package to the mayor to say, this is what I am interested in doing in the community. And he kind of, we met, and he flipped through it and kind of put it on his desk. And he asked me, he said, so where you from? And I said, well, I'm from right up the road. His next question, well, who your people? And I began to tell him that my mother was Genevia Roberts, Genevia Turner. And I said, well, you may not know her by that name. You may know Genevia Roberts. And he leaned back. He said, you Sammy Roberts' grandson? I said, yes, sir. And he said, ooh-wee, Sugar knows she could make some good biscuits. And he started talking about my grandmother's, culinary skills, which are legendary. But at that moment, he began to unpack the relationship that he had with my grandfather, and how important my grandfather was in him getting his first job as an adult, mentoring him in terms of understanding what it meant to be a man working in our community. And also showed him, he said, I always said that when I grew up, I wanted to love my wife the way that Mr. Sammy loved his wife. So it's just a depth of relationship there that I inherited. And those relationships, I are central and integral to the development of this work. So there's a lot of relationships that are involved, but they're all long-term. We're in it for the long haul.
That's so great. Thank you. I'm really, I was very moved by the project that you do with young people, the DigiLab.
DigiCulture Lab.
DigiCulture Lab. One of the I want to say young artists involved talked about that work, which combines art making, documentation, and agriculture. And she said that what's so powerful about the work is that it makes the young participants who are middle school age feel worthy to dream, and that they can actually build on those dreams, and that there's a support system to actualize those dreams. You know, I rile at the term placemaking, like many of us do. That's an old thing to talk about, but I feel like what you're doing through these different programs, and I'd love for you to reflect on the DigiCulture Lab, but is a notion of sovereignty of the imagination, which is a place. It's an inner place, and how critical it is for us to think about that inner place as a place of deep and incredibly powerful work, especially cross-generational, which flows through all of the work of Sipp culture.
Well, it's the foundation. The DigiCulture Lab is a 4-week summer program. That's how it started. That works with students that are in middle school, 6th to 8th grade, 12 to 14 years old. And it basically teaches them the fundamentals of agriculture. So they learn like the basics, soil health, you know, how to test soil samples, you know, the germination times of seeds, just all the basic stuff they probably hadn't learned, were introduced to in school, but they really didn't care because it's not hands-on. And then they learn also the digital tools, photography, short video making, and audio production. And the point of it is for them to really connect with their families and learn about their own history in Utica. And that's what their own little short video becomes about. It's about them. It's a way for them to be introduced to the world. We do it for a couple of reasons. The main reason is that because both of our high schools in our community were shut down. So in 1993, we lost our first high school. In 2014, we lost our second high school. And all of our children now go, basically 16 miles away to go to high school. So after 8th grade, our students are on a constant journey further and further away from their home community. And so we want to invest in them in that middle school age to say, hey, we know that for the next 4 years, you're going to be spending most of your day in another community. But we want you to know that there's a home for you here. And there's a place here to make investments in you, and a place where you can grow and develop over time, so that you never feel like you're going somewhere outside of your community because your community doesn't have, or because your community is not investing in you. The second reason we do that, and why we really focus on the digital media portion of it, is because this generation will be the first generation that will have their entire lives documented digitally. And many of them don't understand what that means to start creating a digital footprint the first moment, that you arrive on the scene, and to have that digital footprint speak to other people about who you are, about the quality of who you are as an individual, about your likes and dislikes, creating a social profile of who you are. That's a responsibility that we don't teach our young people about when they inherit this social media space. And so the digital media part is about understanding your role as a content producer, understanding the role of media as you shaping and owning your own narrative and creating the culture that you want to be representative of yourself.
I'm struck by the feeling that art is pervasive in all aspects of this work, that imagination is pervasive in all aspects of this work, even though it lives on a continuum that is planting seeds and tending the soil, to trying to affect policy, to community organizing. And I think it's important to keep coming back to that sentiment, that this is a work centered on artistic practice and creative practice. When I asked you, we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to share a video that's 1.5 minutes. So Carlton,
okay, I'll be quick.
This is just I want to introduce Jean Green, because I'd asked you about these relationships, which the relationships don't show up in our spreadsheets. They don't show up in our grants so much, but they are the source. And when I asked you about a particular relationship, you mentioned Jean Green. Can you just briefly introduce her so I can let her have the semi-last word in today's conversation?
Jean is a sweetheart. Jean just retired as the librarian in our local community college. And when we first kind of met each other as we were early starting Sipp Culture work, Jean immediately knew that what we were doing was really important to the work that she was doing in preserving the legacy on the campus, and began to make some connections. And we found each other as kindred spirits. And we haven't been able to get rid of each other since.
Great, thanks. If we can play this very short video clip of Jean responding to the question about how her dreams and Sipp's dreams overlap.
Important. And I know that you think is important because Carlton told me that you.
That's the beginning. If you can go to 48, whatever the cue was on there, please.
Of keeping records and holding stories and
Yes.
the notion of an archive. So
In order to see a vision, sometimes we don't know that we can see a different outcome until someone shows us that that is a possibility.
yeah.
I see Sipp empowering the community to see the possibilities that are right there for us to do, to grasp. I see them pulling in these pieces of a dream, of a vision, by bringing in the artists, by bringing in the speakers, by showing us through example how you can take something that looks like it's gone and revitalize it. They literally put it in the ground and make it grow. It's such a perfect metaphor for what we can do for this town. This community, we can take what looks like it's almost dead, and through nurturing and visioning and empowering, we can make it so much more than what it was in its heyday. I see that message.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jean, even though she couldn't be here, for doing that. And Carlton, it's really, thank you so much for everything that you and everyone at Sipp Culture is doing. It's a model that is we need to be following. So much gratitude and admiration. I'm gonna close this off and pass it back to Dr. Curtis. Thank you. And please, everybody, thunderous applause for Sipp Culture.
Thank you both. Thank you both for that amazing conversation. And as we spoke about at the top of our, in the introduction, an opportunity to really reflect, and an opportunity to really center arts and to center people in the work that we're doing, and to dream. So thank you both, Carlton and Matthew, for that incredible conversation.